The story of the Navarro family could have been taken from a perfect movie. Made up of Raul, a hardworking and disciplined man, his wife Patricia, a loving and dedicated woman, and their twin sons, Alejandro and Gabriel, the family always gave the impression of being a model of unity and success. They lived in a small town where everyone knew each other, and the Navarros were respected for their warmth and family values. However, beneath that facade of normality, a dark secret was hidden that was about to tear them apart. Alejandro and Gabriel, 20 years old, were identical not only in appearance, but also in charisma. Both were tall, athletically built, with light brown hair that shined in the sun and piercing green eyes. Since they were children, their connection was unbreakable. While other brothers argued and competed, Alejandro and Gabriel seemed inseparable, always covering each other's backs and sharing everything. It was common to see them together at school, on the soccer team, or at town parties, where they became the center of attention for girls and boys alike. Although life seemed perfect, there was something peculiar about their relationship that only they could notice. In adolescence, what began as jokes and innocent games between siblings was transformed into longer than normal glances, into brushes that aroused confusing feelings. Neither of them talked about it, but they both felt it. It was a secret that terrified them, because they knew that what was happening between them was not normal. And yet, they could not avoid it. Raul Navarro was a man of strict values. As a retired military man, his life had been marked by discipline and sacrifice. He loved his children, but had always maintained a distant relationship with them. Raul valued order and family traditions. For him, Alejandro and Gabriel were his pride and his legacy, and he expected them to follow his example of righteousness. Patricia, on the other hand, was the soul of the house. Unlike Raul, she was in charge of maintaining a warm and loving atmosphere at home. She always cared about the details, from cooking the twins' favorite meals to attending their games. Although she sometimes noticed a peculiar connection between her children, she attributed it to the twins' special nature and did not give it much importance. From childhood, the twins shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams, and even friends. However, over time, that bond began to evolve into something deeper and more complicated. It all started with subtle gestures. Alejandro realized that he could not stop watching Gabriel when they went swimming together. Gabriel, in turn, noticed that his heart raced when Alejandro looked him directly in the eyes. The first signs of attraction emerged when they were both 15 years old. During summer nights, they used to stay up late in their shared room, talking about everything and nothing. One of those days, while discussing romantic relationships, Gabriel joked that Alejandro was so attractive that even he would be willing to go out with him if they were not brothers. Although they laughed, the statement left a palpable tension in the air. As they grew older, they both tried to ignore what they felt, but the attraction remained. During high school, although they both had relationships with girls, none of them lasted long. Their partners always commented on how strange it was to compete with the connection between the twins. "It's like you're in love with your brother," an ex-girlfriend once told Alejandro jokingly. What she didn't know was that, deep down, she was right. Things got more intense when they turned 18. During a family trip to the beach, they shared a room, as always. But this time, the closeness felt different. One night, while Alejandro was staring at the ceiling, Gabriel approached him and confessed what he had been repressing for years. "Sometimes I feel like you're more than my brother." The silence that followed was unbearable. Alejandro, instead of rejecting him, answered, "I feel the same way too." That confession was the point of no return. Although neither of them dared to take the next step at that moment, the barrier had been broken. The following years were marked by a dangerous game. On the one hand, they both tried to keep up appearances in front of their parents and friends. On the other, in the privacy of their room or in moments when they knew they were alone, their relationship became more intimate. An accidental touch became a caress. A long look transformed into a stolen kiss. They knew that what they were doing was wrong. Guilt tormented them, but the attraction was stronger. They tried to avoid it, but they always returned to the same thing. It was as if they were two irresistible magnets, destined to be together despite the consequences. Although Raul and Patricia had no idea what was going on, they began to notice changes in the twins' dynamic. They no longer seemed as interested in socializing with others. They spent more time together, locked in their room, and often made excuses to avoid going out as a family. Raul, with his strict nature, began to worry about his children's isolation, but Patricia reassured him. telling him it was just a phase. However, there were times when Patricia couldn't help but feel an inexplicable discomfort. One night, while cleaning the living room, she heard laughter coming from the twins' room. Although it was normal for them to get along, that laughter had a different tone. It was more intimate, more intense. Patricia decided to ignore it, convincing herself that she was exaggerating. The tension grew day by day. The twins knew that their secret could not be kept hidden forever. Sometimes they talked about the possibility of separating, of trying to lead normal lives, but each attempt failed. They always came back to each other, as if something bigger than themselves united them. The Navarro family went about their daily routine, never imagining that the storm was brewing inside them. Alejandro and Gabriel lived in a constant state of paranoia, fearing that their parents would discover the truth. However, what they didn't know was that the real disaster was just around the corner, and that the relationship they had tried to protect at all costs would end up destroying everything they knew. As the years passed, the relationship between Alejandro and Gabriel became more intense and complicated. What began as a typical brotherly connection, marked by games, jokes, and communication that seemed almost telepathic, transformed into something much deeper, darker, and completely forbidden. Neither of them could deny the attraction they felt for each other, but guilt and fear tormented them. Everything began to overflow when they turned 19. They were both in a stage of self-discovery, and while their friends talked about girlfriends, relationships, and first experiences, they found themselves caught in a dilemma they couldn't share with anyone. Alejandro had had a few romances, as had Gabriel, but they always ended abruptly. Their partners commented, in a tone somewhere between amused and frustrated, that the twins seemed more interested in being together than in anyone else. "It's like we don't need anyone else," Alejandro told Gabriel one night, while they were chatting in their shared room. That comment, although intended to be innocent, ignited something in the atmosphere. They both felt it, that uncomfortable electricity they could no longer ignore. That night, the boundary between what was allowed and what was forbidden was completely broken. A simple accidental brush turned into a caress, and before they could stop themselves, their lips met. When they finally separated, silence fell over the room. Neither of them knew what to say. They were both scared, confused, but also excited. They knew what had just happened wasn't normal, but they couldn't deny it either. They had wanted it for a long time. After that first time, they tried to prevent it from happening again. For days they barely looked into each other's eyes, trying to convince themselves that it had all been a mistake. However, the tension between them was palpable, and it wasn't long before they fell out again. Alejandro was the first to take the initiative. One night, while his parents were out, he approached Gabriel with a mix of nervousness and determination. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he said. Gabriel didn't answer right away, but his look said it all. That night, what had started as a moment of weakness became the start of a secret relationship that would consume them completely. From then on, every moment they spent together was a mix of passion, guilt, and fear. They knew what they were doing was wrong, but they also knew they couldn't stop. They took advantage of any opportunity to be alone. When their parents left the house, when Raul fell asleep on the couch, or even at night, in the privacy of their shared room. Over time, their encounters became more frequent and less controlled. The adrenaline of being discovered only seemed to intensify their desire. Every glance, every touch, every secretly whispered word fueled the obsession they felt for each other. Despite everything, they were both aware that their relationship was destroying something inside them. Guilt manifested itself in small details. In the way they avoided looking their parents in the eye, in how they became increasingly secretive, and in the arguments that began to arise between them. "This can't go on like this," Gabriel said one night, after one of their encounters. "I know," Alejandro replied, "but I can't help it." They tried to end their relationship on several occasions, but they always came back to each other. It was as if they were trapped in a vicious circle from which they could not escape. On the one hand, they wanted to stop and lead normal lives, but on the other, the idea of separating was unbearable. Meanwhile, Patricia and Raul began to notice changes in their children's behavior. The twins, who had always been sociable and outgoing, became more isolated. They no longer invited friends over or talked about their personal lives. They spent most of their time together, locked in their room or going out without giving any explanation. Patricia, with her maternal instinct, began to suspect that something was not right. There were times when she noticed a strange tension between them, a kind of connection that went beyond what was normal for siblings. However, she did not want to think the worst. One afternoon, while cleaning the twins' room, she found a notebook hidden under Gabriel's mattress. When she opened it, what she saw left her frozen. There were drawings of Alejandro, accompanied by phrases like, "I can't live without him," and "I love him more than anything in the world." Patricia felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She decided to remain silent for the moment, fearing that confronting them might make things worse. It all came to a head one night, when Patricia returned home earlier than expected. She had been at the grocery store and thought Raul was in the garden working, but upon entering the house, she heard noises coming from the twins' room. At first she thought they were arguing, but when she opened the door, what she saw left her speechless. Alejandro and Gabriel were in bed together, completely oblivious to the world around them. Upon seeing their mother, they immediately separated, but the damage had already been done. Patricia ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her, tears in her eyes. That night, she couldn't sleep. She was devastated, confused, and terrified. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. She decided not to say anything to Raul for the moment, fearing his reaction. From that day on, the dynamic in the house changed drastically. Patricia avoided the twins as much as she could, and they, in turn, tried to act as if nothing had happened. However, the tension was palpable. Raul, who didn't know what had happened, began to notice that something was wrong. "What's wrong with you lately?" he asked Patricia one night while they were having dinner. "Nothing, I'm just tired," she replied, avoiding his gaze. Raul wasn't convinced, but he decided not to insist. However, he began to observe the twins more closely, looking for any sign that would explain the change in the family atmosphere. One night, as he walked down the hall, he heard the twins talking in their room. He stopped to listen, and what he heard left him frozen. "Mom saw us. I don't know how much longer we can hide this." Raul felt his blood boil. Without saying a word, he walked away and locked himself in his room, where he spent hours trying to process what he had heard. The tension in the Navarro family reached its breaking point when Raul, after hearing the conversation between the twins, could not contain his fury. What had previously been suspicions and small signs was now a certainty that gnawed at him inside. His pride, his values, and everything he had built as a man of principles were crumbling in the face of the reality of his children. For him, what Alejandro and Gabriel were doing was not only immoral, but a direct affront to the structure he had tried to instill in them. The next morning, Raul decided to confront the twins. He called them into the living room, where Patricia was already waiting for them with worried eyes. He didn't know exactly what her husband had planned, but he feared the worst. "I want you to tell me the truth, here and now," Raul demanded, with a voice so firm that Alejandro and Gabriel didn't dare look him directly in the eyes. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Alejandro tried to evade, although his tone gave him away. "Don't play dumb with me. I know what's going on between you two." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia put a hand to her mouth, while the twins exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Gabriel spoke up. "Dad, we didn't want things to be like this. We didn't plan it, but this isn't something we can change." Raul slammed his fist on the table, interrupting him. "This is unacceptable. They're brothers, for God's sake. This is an aberration." Patricia tried to calm him down, but Raul was beside himself. He stood up suddenly and pointed at the twins with his finger. "This ends today. I will not allow you to continue to tarnish this family." Alejandro tried to explain, but Raul did not let him speak. Instead, he ordered them to go to their room and not come out until further notice. The twins, frightened, obeyed. As they climbed the stairs, Patricia tried to reason with her husband. "Raul, please, this is a delicate situation. You cannot handle it with anger." "How do you expect me to handle it?" he replied, furious. "This is not something that can be solved with soft words." That night, Raul could not sleep. His mind was filled with dark thoughts, and while the rest of the house was silent, he began to come up with a plan. For him, the only solution was to end the twins' relationship, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that. In the following days, Raul pretended to have accepted the situation. Although inside he was filled with hatred and repulsion, he began to act calmer and more understanding. He wanted the twins to let their guard down, so they wouldn't suspect his true intentions. "I've been thinking a lot," And maybe we should seek professional help, he told them one evening, while they were having dinner. Patricia looked at him in disbelief, but decided not to contradict him at that moment. The twins, for their part, were relieved to see that their father seemed to be reconsidering his stance. However, they couldn't have been more wrong. Raul began to investigate in secret. He spent hours in his office, looking for information on how to carry out his plan without raising suspicion. For him, it wasn't just about ending the relationship between Alejandro and Gabriel, but about making sure they could never be together again. One night, while everyone was asleep, Raul decided it was time to act. He had devised a meticulous plan, involving a mix of deception and premeditated violence. First, he made sure Patricia wasn't at home. He asked her to visit her sister in the neighboring town, claiming that he needed time to talk to the twins alone. When Patricia left, Raul called Alejandro and Gabriel into his office. "I want to talk to you about something important," he said, feigning a conciliatory tone. The twins, though still wary of their father, decided to listen to him. However, what they found upon entering the office was a terrifying scene. Raul had placed several tools on the table, including a rope and a knife. "This ends here," he said, as he closed the door behind them. Before the twins could react, Raul lunged at them with tremendous force. Alejandro tried to defend himself, but Raul was stronger and blinded by his anger. Gabriel, in a desperate attempt to protect his brother, grabbed the knife, but Raul quickly disarmed him. Within minutes, what had started as an argument turned into an act of uncontrollable violence. Raul, in his fury, did not measure the consequences of his actions. When he finally stopped, Alejandro lay on the floor, lifeless. Gabriel, wounded, managed to escape from the office and run out of the house, screaming for help. When Patricia returned home that night, she found Gabriel in the garden, covered in blood and crying inconsolably. "What happened?" she screamed as she ran towards him. Gabriel, sobbing, explained to her what had happened. Patricia, horrified, ran into the house, where she found Alejandro's body and Raul sitting in the office, staring into space. "What have you done?" she yelled, calling the police. Raul did not respond. He knew his life was over the moment he committed the murder, but he had no regrets. To him, what he had done was a necessary act to preserve the honor of his family. The Navarro case shocked the small town and became national news. During the trial, Gabriel testified against his father, describing in detail the attack and the murder of his brother. Patricia, although devastated, also decided to support her son and seek justice for Alejandro. Raul tried to justify his actions, arguing that he had done it for the good of his family. However, the jury showed no mercy. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gabriel, for his part, never fully recovered. The loss of his brother and the trauma of what happened left him scarred for life. He decided to move away from the town and change his last name, in an attempt to leave the past behind. However, Alejandro's memories haunted him constantly, reminding him not only of the love they shared, but also the price they paid for it. The Navarro tragedy is a reminder of how prejudice and intolerance can destroy families and lives. Although the relationship between Alejandro and Gabriel was controversial and forbidden, what happened in that house was the result of a chain of decisions driven by fear and misunderstanding. Ultimately, everyone involved paid a high price, leaving an indelible lesson for those who knew their story.